BBC Southern Counties Radio.
Onwards and upwards. I think we're going to get a lot of reaction from you on the next article we're running on Mid-Morning Music and Chat. We're talking alternatives. Some people say complementary therapies, things like hypnotherapy, magnotherapy, talking about that in just a moment, the Alexander technique, acupuncture, hypnotherapy, just some of the complementary treatments that you can get. But what are they and do they work? In a moment, I'll be joined by two men who put alternative medicine on trial. Their book, Trick or Treatment, explores the different practices and potions and gives their verdict. But first, we sent our reporter Claire Dutton onto Camberley High Street to ask these people for their views.
I've used acupuncture and I do use herbal remedies, yes. My acupuncture was brilliant. It worked for me. And I do use herbal remedies on a day-to-day basis.
What's the impetus behind that decision as opposed to going down your traditional medicine route?
I suppose I come from a nursing background and I'm aware that sometimes chemical therapies may not be the best answer because of side effects that can be given to you.
Is it anything to do with your kind of mental attitude towards it as well, or is it these herbal and alternative therapies actually work?
No, I think it's a frame of mind. I think you can believe in anything. If it's going to work, it's going to work for you. That's my own personal thought anyway.
Arnica, use arnica all the time, any bruising, stuff like that. There's Aesculus, if you've got piles apparently, that's supposed to be very good. And it does work, definitely. Anything, I'm prepared to try any herbal stuff really.
How useful would you say they are as an alternative?
I think they're very useful because you know that you're not putting chemicals in your body, it's all natural stuff, and I'd much rather put that in my body than any of the chemicals and the additives because I think that those cause a lot of the cancers and things that a lot of people are experiencing now that they didn't experience years ago.
So essential oils and wine is what I use, but the geranium especially, I just love it because it's so relaxing. I use that in labour actually. It's absolutely brilliant.
So how does that work?
Well, basically my husband rubbed it on my back and I had it on my body, and it was just very relaxing. And all the midwives, when they came in, they said this is the best smelling room delivery suite, but it was it just worked.
For people that don't know what that is, what was that called again? And what?
That's geranium oil and clary sage.
So they're from flowers, basically?
Yeah, basically natural.
What are they supposed to do? If you read a list of things that geranium oil was supposed to help you with, what would it say?
Relaxing, de-stress, and clary sage the same. And clary sage is very good for pain. So
perfect for use in labour?
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting stuff there. Claire Dutton there on Camberley High Street. Now on BBC Southern Counties Radio, I'm joined by Simon Singh and Professor Edzard Ernst, author of Trick or Treatment, Alternative Medicine on Trial. Hi there, Simon.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, and Good morning, Edzard. Can I call you Edzard?
Yes, sure.
Good. Your background, you're both scientists, aren't you? Simon, what's your background?
My background is in science, but really I'm a journalist, and for the last sort of 15 years, that's what I've done. I've written about maths and astronomy and security, computer online security, and now alternative medicine.
Edzard, your background?
I'm a physician trained in Germany, and I've learned many of the complementary techniques that we are today talking about. And since 15 years, I'm chair of complementary medicine and researching these techniques. In other words, I want to know which is safe and which is effective.
Do you let's get this straight out of the way. When you both set out on this trip through Trick or Treatment, did you have an agenda? Are you? I don't want to say working for a specific area of medicine, or were you completely open-minded?
Well, I'm certainly interested in finding the truth. That is my agenda. I'm not paid by any industry, certainly not by big pharma, as a lot of people seem to speculate. So my agenda is that of a medical scientist.
And Simon, overall, could you come to a conclusion? I mean, I've been through the book and dipped in and out, and it's quite a heavy tome, I have to say that, and I don't just mean in picking it up in pounds and ounces. But did you come to a conclusion?
I think so. I think we came to... The thing is, alternative medicine is just such a catch-all term. It's hard to make a general conclusion about it. What you have to do is break it down into each of the therapies, and then you even have to break it down into each therapy applied to each particular condition. Now, once you do that, you can come to some conclusions. Some of them are quite blanket. So, for example, homeopathy there have been over 200 scientific trials. It's been around for 200 years. It's been studied to death. And as far as all the evidence can tell us, when you put it all together, there's no evidence that homeopathy is effective for anything. When you look at something like acupuncture, the picture's more mixed. It's possible there's some borderline evidence, it's tentative, but it does seem to be effective for addressing some types of pain and some types of nausea. But no real evidence for anything else.
But can I just come in here? Because I know a lot of my listeners, as you know, and as you've been listening, are very into these. Let's just talk acupuncture. Now, it's been around for thousands of years. Now, I'm sure the Chinese, if it hadn't worked in the first couple of years and was not getting a reaction, would have said, blow this for a game of cowboys, we're going to move on to something else, chewing bark or something. So they can't, how can I put it, the whole nation and its generations can't be totally stupid, can they?
I'm afraid they can. Medical history is littered with things like this. Bloodletting was about in China. It was about in Western countries. We've used it for millennia, and we've killed millions with it. So the fact that something has stood the test of time is nearly meaningless.
So this is interesting stuff.
So can I just say bloodletting? The idea of bloodletting is that the illness kind of pools in our blood, and our blood collects, and the way you would release the disease is to put a severe cut in the body, and maybe using leeches, maybe using just cuts, and you release the blood, you release the evil and the poison. And people have done this in Western, all around the world for thousands of years. And the thing is, initially it might give a sedative effect. So if somebody's really, kind of tossing and turning in bed and is violently ill, take out some blood, they're sedated. You give everybody the impression that they're getting better, but in fact you're doing them harm. You're draining them of their lifeblood. And it was only in about 150 years ago that the practice of bloodletting in Europe began to decline, because scientists said, okay, we'll take 100 patients here, let's give them bloodletting. Here's another 100 patients, let's not give them bloodletting, and let's wait a couple of weeks and see who gets better. And the people who don't get bloodletting do better than those who do.
Interesting stuff, and I guess at some point in history, bloodletting would have been not alternative therapy, would have been mainstream medicine.
Yeah.
Well, all of alternative medicine started as mainstream. Certainly herbal medicine was entirely mainstream. Our pharmacopoeias were basically 100% herbal medicine. So what we now think of as alternative medicine is by and large the discarded stuff from mainstream medicine.
So, for example, willow bark was very popular in the West as a treatment for fevers and pains and all sorts of things. And actually, it is really effective. The problem is it gives you terrible side effects. It's quite toxic. And you don't want to go around chopping down willow trees or stripping them of their bark. So what scientists did was say, OK, let's find out what's really effective in this willow bark. And let's find out a way of getting rid of the toxic stuff. Let's produce it in a factory so we don't need to cut down trees, and we can make it cheaper. And before you know it, you've got aspirin. So aspirin grows out of the herbal tradition and is refined and made better. And it's one of the simplest, cheapest drugs in the world today, and we know it works.
Simon and Edzard, I know you're happy to take calls. We have one coming through now, OK. And this is Peter from Polegate. Peter, what is this therapy you used?
It's called chelation therapy.
What's that?
Well, what they do, you go to a clinic and they put a catheter into the arm, and they put in this EDTA acid. Now, what it does, in fact, it disperses and gets rid of all the plaque and all the muck in the arteries and in the veins, right throughout the body. I mean, I've had it now for a few years, and I go about every 3 months now just to get a check, and everything is fine. I had heart surgery 22 years ago. After 14 years, they wrote me off and said there is anything more we can do for you, because the 5 arteries that were blocked, they're now diseased, they're no good, but you have 8 other blocks, and we've got nothing to latch on to.
OK, chelation therapy. Simon and Edzard, did you look into this?
Yes, it's a very interesting subject, because it's actually not. It's one of those treatments that hasn't stood the test of time. It's very modern. It was developed in
1931.
So it hasn't stood the test of hundreds of years, and it was invented to bind toxins, heavy metals, for instance. If you have heavy metal poisoning, it is a lifesaver. It is entirely conventional, and it's used in intensive care units throughout the world.
So chelation therapy got the thumb up from you too?
No. Wait on. In alternative medicine, it is used entirely differently. Alternative practitioners tell you that your arteries are blocked by calcium, and to remove these blockages, you need to inject EDTA, and this takes out the calcium. Now, this is a concept of arteriosclerosis, of the thickening of arteries, which is outdated. We now know that the story is much more complicated than that, and the point, the most crucial point, is that chelation therapy for these indications has been tested, has been submitted to clinical trials, and has not been shown to be effective. Even more crucially, no, it's not rubbish, sir. I tell you what the clinical trials say. What you have experienced is another matter. But the more crucial point is that it is a treatment which is associated with very serious risks. People have died of that. So you need to balance this lack of evidence in terms of effectiveness against very substantial risk, and if you do that, it comes out negative. So I would not recommend it to anybody for these indications.
I would suggest, sir, that you read the overview of chelation therapy, and they've produced hundreds and hundreds of papers on this particular thing, and it's in going all over the world, especially now in Europe, and they've taken it up.
Peter, we're going to leave it there, but thank you so very, very much. And you've just pointed at my motto in life, which is if two people agree on a subject, it means one of them isn't thinking. So thanks for thinking.
But Pete, sorry, just on Peter's case. I mean, I think the thing is that what scientists want to do is they want to help people, and that's why chelation therapy was developed. And if I got mercury poisoning now, I'd be straight down to an emergency department, and I'd have chelation therapy to try and strip out that mercury poisoning. The alternative industry will perhaps tell you that the mercury fillings can poison you, and we're going to use chelation therapy to clean your body from but you don't get poison from mercury fillings. So the alternative industry is just, on that particular area, there are some parts of the alternative industry which we actually quite endorse, and we think they're quite positive in what they do. But chelation therapy, unfortunately, is just not one of them.
Sue from Worthing?
Oh, hello, good morning.
Yeah, you use these wristbands, do you?
Yes. Now, I'm a nurse, and seen it from all sides. I prefer the term complementary to alternative, complementary, and yes, I do believe in this. In my case, I've got an artery that's pressed on there's a little ligament that's calcified at the back of the neck, and it presses onto that artery and causes a lot of nausea, and travel is restricted right down. However, I got so fed up with this, I thought I'm going to try this. A friend recommended, and I tried it last week, and for the first time, yes, it did. It took 35 minutes for nausea that would begun to go down, 50 minutes before it was really coming down, and I did a 14-mile journey, had a latte all the way back, and I found that was brilliant.
Okay, Sue,
acupuncture is very ancient.
All right, okay, Sue, I'm going to leave that thought, and I'll come back to Simon and Edzard in just a moment, but let's collect these up. Dave from Barnham, you used a chiropractor. What was your experience, Dave?
There's two things. I used to use a herbal practor and also a chiropractor. The chiropractor, I had trouble in my stomach for 5 years. I put my back out, didn't realise it. I got made redundant 7 times, and I was travelling 120 miles to work. I was having a lot of trouble and pain. I ended up twice in a hospital under an endoscopy. They couldn't sort it out, didn't know what it was. I went to the chiropractor. They manipulated me about, and he said, look, any other problems with you? Because I put the back out through lifting something, and I explained about this digestive system, and he said, get back up on the couch. He said, I want to have another look at you. He said, it's your thoracic nerve, T5, 6 and 7. Hang on. He says, look, I'll sort it out for you. And he did a few items, don't know what it was, and I said, is that it? He says, yeah. I said, you're joking. I said, I've had 5 years of trouble with this. I said, you mean to tell me you can just do whatever you've done, and that's going to put it right? Yeah, he said, if you want another treatment, you come back next week. Never had any problem after that.
Dave, going to leave it there because I want to squeeze in. We've got two guests in the studio, and Simon and Professor Edzard Ernst, author of Trick or Treatment. Those little pressure things, seasickness and travel sickness, Simon?
I've not had much experience of those. Edzard's probably better judge.
I can comment on this. These are little pressure bands that you put on your wrist, and effectively it's a form of acupuncture. Instead of needles, it uses pressure. There's plenty of science on this, clinical trials, to show that it actually does work. So your caller was entirely right. It works against nausea and vomiting from various causes. For instance, morning sickness in early pregnancy, or travel sickness, or nausea induced by chemotherapy in cancer care. So that's a good one.
And chiropractor?
Chiropractor, very, very mixed. Chiropractors treat mainly backs, and for that the evidence is so and so. I'm not totally convinced, but there is some positive evidence. Once they treat other conditions, I'm much more concerned, and I don't see the evidence. We have looked hard and long to find it. It isn't there.
Simon Singh and Edzard Ernst, thank you so very much. You've started something here, which is never a bad thing, and I think you're going to start and end lots of arguments in Trick or Treatment, Alternative Medicine on Trial. Guys, thank you so very much. Good stuff.
Our pleasure.
Pleasures are mine as well. Simon and Edzard there. Now, in the studio, sitting around very, very patiently, I want to introduce you to Al Cooke. Hello there, Al.
Hello there, Gordon.
This is Al Cooke, a magnotherapist.
That's correct, yes.
If you can get you to move in so we can see you. Okay, so a magnotherapy is what?
Well, basically, again, there's a lot of debate on this, but it's, in simple terms, when you place a magnet on the skin, two things happen normally. The tissue lengthens, and in turn more oxygen is brought to the area, and this in turn again speeds up the blood supply, which helps the healing.
Now, is that science or is that belief?
That's believed.
That's definitely down to belief.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, we can't make any medical claims on this, but that is what is believed happens, and there's still a lot of debate going on.
You know, if you go into a health shop and you read the labels on the bottles in there, they never tell you really what it's for, because they can't make any claims, can they? So you have to do your own research, don't you?
That's correct, and obviously with something like that, it's very expensive to do.
So that's Al Cooke, magnotherapist from Horsham, and look into his eyes, Angus Ewing, a hypnotherapist from Worthing. You look every inch a hypnotherapist, I've got to say that, and also Rodney Bewes from the Likely Lads. But hypnotherapy, I think most 90% of people would know what it is, but it's a million miles away from what you might see on a stage during a cabaret performance.
Very much so, yes.
And I think we need to get that out of the way.
That's very misleading.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're not going to sort of be drinking water and think it's vodka and eating onions and thinking they're apples. No. What is it other than just a good sleep?
It isn't sleep. I think that this is a problem. That there's going to be arguments, especially amongst the scientific community, as and what hypnosis is forever and a day. Basically, it's an altered state of awareness, which is very relaxing. And in that state, it's possible to go and access, not to analyse, but to maybe change the way that the mind is actually carrying out certain functions.
And we've had this case recently in the area. He was on the radio station and on the TV of the guy who did his own hypnotherapy before he had some invasive surgery on his... I mean, I was grimacing as I was just looking at the tools they used on his hand, I think.
That's right.
So I mean, that, you can't argue with that, can you? Because it happened.
Yes.
Now, either that or the guy has got the highest threshold of pain in the world. But he hypnotised himself. Is there a difference between hypnotism and hypnotherapy, or are they the same thing?
Hypnotism is just a method. It is using the therapies that come out of it, because there isn't one. And this is where I would certainly take issue with the authors of this, is the fact that there's a whole load of therapies that, with the aid of hypnosis, become very much more effective. And so if I can just come back to the article here where it says there's no evidence, I would query, what research did they do? Was it with direct suggestion, aversion, hypnoanalysis, solution-orientated, 1 session, 2 session, 3 session, eclectic? All of these, that's just a small variety of what is out there in hypnotherapy.
Now, a moment ago, I hypnotised you into thinking that our two guests, Simon and Edzard, had gone.
No.
They're still here.
Good.
They are gagging to talk to you about this. So what we're going to do...
I'm gagging to talk to them.
I bet you are, buddy. Okay, seconds out. Right, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, okay, tend to the wounded, exchange prisoners. We're going to do some travel and some weather and some cricket. And then we'll come back. We'll come back to Simon and Edzard and to Al and to Angus. And we're also taking your calls. 08459 570057. Oh, there'll be tears before bedtime. So, bright spells at first, but the weather is moving faster than we predicted today. So, occasional rain for a time around the middle of the day is already happening. So that means it should clear up earlier. Light to moderate southeasterly winds responsible for today's weather. Tonight, staying dry with some cloud breaks and also calm and light winds. That means areas of mist, fog and low cloud forming over our region. And our minimum temperature tonight, 6 Celsius, 43 degrees Fahrenheit.
BBC Southern Counties Radio Travel.
Let's start out on the motorways and the M25. Still slow clockwise between junctions 9 and 10. We can see on the cameras just the volume of traffic from what we can see. M23 is running smoothly despite the heavy rain, and the M3 is running nicely. No reported problems north and southbound. On now to the A217 at Reigate. The A217 is partially blocked because of an accident near to the M25. In fact, it's actually on the roundabout. One vehicle involved. Traffic is coping quite well. On to Kings Road in Brighton. That's slow eastbound at West Street as you head through the ongoing roadworks. Thanks again to the County Council Control Room. And as for public transport, not too bad. No reported problems on trains and ferries. You can always update us on 08459 570057. James Worley, BBC Southern Counties Radio.
Log on for the latest travel updates. bbc.co.uk/Southern Counties.
Our guest in the studio, Alan Cooke, magnotherapist, and we talked about this. Getting a couple of calls, people sort of saying, how does it work? And you've already said you're not quite sure.
Well, as I say, that's what's believed. How it works is more down to the scientists, I think.
How did you get involved in it? How did you discover it?
It's a long story, Gordon, but basically I had a problem with blood pressure, and I saw a bracelet on a shopping channel and basically sent away for that bracelet. They were making claims that it could help reduce blood pressure, and in fact it did, to my amazement, because I was a big...
And can you, and then now you're very much involved in the world of magnotherapy, but can you say that was more than, I mean, you know what I'm going to say, it was more than just coincidence, your blood pressure would have resolved itself eventually anyway?
Well, I don't know that. I mean, I was on pills at the time, I was on medication, and it just helped alongside it. So this is this complementary thing. What I would never say to people is don't stop taking medicine, or you'll consult with your GP, but certainly alongside it seems to help very well.
Let's go back to Professor Edson.
Can I just say one other thing there about animals? We've had a lot of response from animals, and they can't talk to us.
No, I know where you're going on that. Simon Singh and Professor Edzard Ernst, welcome back.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, it's the same fee, by the way, guys. Okay. All right, well, let's just talk about this, because I know with homeopathy, and now we're talking magnotherapy, there is this thing about young children and animals. You can't placebo them. So Professor Edzard, what's going on there?
A lot of people say that, but it's actually not true. Part of the placebo effect was discovered in animals, would you believe? Pavlov, a Russian physiologist, discovered that he can condition animals to respond in a certain way. He got the Nobel Prize for it. Yet all those people who say placebo doesn't work in animals seem to ignore that Nobel Prize.
But hang on, isn't that basically training? If you put a pill into an animal, you can't you can't let that animal know it could get better. Because surely the idea of a placebo effect is you believe it's going to do you good.
The animal, for example, the animal may associate getting better or treatment with going to a vet, for example, so you can induce a placebo effect that way. You also have a secondary placebo effect via the owner. The owner will look at the animal differently. They will look for signs of improvement. So their observations will be slightly biased. They're a loving owner. They care about their pet so much. They want it to get better. They've just spent some money trying to help the animal. So what you have to do is take unbiased observations. And when you do this, they've done it with, say, homeopathy and cows and mastitis, it makes no difference. And I think the reason we really wanted to come back particularly is magnetherapy is one of those things that really has been studied in clinical trials, and the evidence is really zilch. It's really, and they can be expensive. I don't know how much your guest is charging in the studio, but there are certainly products on the web that cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars which claim to make ridiculous claims about healing properties. And as I say, the evidence is really not there.
Angus?
Alan?
Sorry.
No, well, we don't make those claims. As I say, I would always say go and see your GP before you actually, take on magnet therapy. But it's just something that I've found, and a lot of my customers have found, and we don't charge extortionate rates for any of our products. But there are, I think, a lot of people who have jumped on the bandwagon with magnet therapy, and
but what do you say? What do you say, Al, to our esteemed guests here, Simon and Edzard, doctor and a professor? They say that there's zilch evidence to prove that it works.
Well, Can they prove that it doesn't work as well?
But I think if you were a pharmaceutical company and you said, we're going to sell you a product and we just no idea whether or not it works, but we're going to sell it to you, we're going to charge you money, and we're going to make profit out of it, we'd be up in arms. And that's why we regulate and restrict these big pharmaceuticals, because we don't want them to rip us off. In this case, again, I think before people sell products, I would like them to really be able to back up those claims with real evidence, just so it's a level playing field.
Let's go to a man who's champing at the bit here, our hypnotherapist, Angus Ewing, from Worthing. First, your reaction to what you've just heard.
Well, I think, I'm sure this is these gentlemen's opinion, but I think that is all it is.
Angus, sorry.
Hang on 1 second.
We do support some of your work. We should stress at this point before you denigrate us. Hypnotherapy is one of those things that does work for some conditions, and they're not our opinions. Edzard's worked for 15 years looking at all the studies, all the research that's out there. And if it were our opinions, it wouldn't have taken so long to write the book.
I mean, first of all, I'm going by the article that was sent to me by the station yesterday, and I've looked through that. I haven't read your book, so I can't comment on the book. And in it said there's no evidence. Well, for a start off, I just mentioned just before the break of how many different approaches there are to hypnotherapy. So therefore, you will find some of those approaches, methods, very much more successful than others. In 1994, a science magazine did a survey across the United States, Europe and this country on stopping smoking, and found hypnotherapy to be the most effective. Are they a load of liars? Because, quite honestly, your article I find incredibly negative. There's two different types of criticism. One is destructive and the other's constructive. I find the majority of this is very destructive, not constructive.
I think we're happy to accept that hypnotherapy works for certain things as evidence. I think Edzard's looked into this in detail. Hypnotherapy is effective for which conditions, Edzard?
Hypnotherapy is effective for a number of painful conditions. It reduces pain, in other words. It is effective for irritable bowel syndrome. It is not effective for a number of other conditions. So it's one of these therapies that is clearly not a panacea, but effective for certain conditions. So I don't know what the station gave you. Maybe we are talking cross purposes here, but we're not trying to say hypnotherapy is bogus.
I think the only place
I never said that. All I said is I've got it highlighted. It said the evidence is that it's not effective to help you to stop smoking.
Exactly.
Even though it's frequently promoted in this context.
That's the problem.
That I would totally dispute. I think that I don't know where you got your evidence from, but just a moment. I belong to the largest association of qualified hypnotherapists in this country. They have never been approached by Professor Ernst or anybody else to go and ask their members to go and supply any questions. So all I can suggest is that perhaps where you're gathering evidence is in a very, very narrow
we can explain where the evidence comes from.
I would dispute it.
Yes, there's an organization which is the indisputably most fair and least biased organization in the whole of medicine. It's called the Cochrane Collaboration. It's a worldwide organization of unbiased, impartial scientists establishing the evidence from anything from surgery to hypnotherapy, and there's a a Cochrane review of the trial data of hypnotherapy for smoking cessation, and it does not show that it is effective for that condition.
Where did they do that?
Well, just before we do that, is it good enough?
They base their evidence on the totality of the published trial evidence. That's
okay, but let me come in here. Is it enough for people to say, it works for me? Are we okay with that? Because I think the first part of the Hippocratic Oath says, first do no harm. So if we're going no further than that, is there a problem? Or can certain alternative complementary therapies be in themselves dangerous?
I think if it works for me, that's a fine principle. But I think before patients embark on a treatment, they need to be informed. And if they're being told that there's evidence that hypnotherapy is effective for addiction, then I think they're being slightly misled. And so they need to be informed when they make that decision.
But you just said that in your writing. Hypnotherapists treat a range of chronic conditions, including pain, anxiety, addictions and phobias. Now, you also call cigarette smoking addictions, so you've rather denied yourselves on that, haven't you?
I'm not sure I did. I wasn't aware that I did.
Well, that's what as I said, I can only go by the article that was forwarded to me.
Okay. So the first thing is that people need to be informed about what the evidence is. And then second, part of that information is about the risks and the side effects.
Where are you going to get that evidence, considering that all of these use totally different suggestions? I mean, certainly within hypnotherapy, I've been having a look at some abstracts. Mostly all of them were based on one session. Now, also, from an in-house magazine, they actually showed that statistically there was less chance of success on a one session.
I can only recommend that you actually do read the Cochrane review, and if as a hypnotherapist you're not even aware that this exists, then maybe this is a good occasion to make you aware of it.
Okay, everybody back to the corners now. Okay,
Gordon, unfortunately we're going to have to love you and leave you, because we have to be over in Radio Essex now.
I wouldn't want to keep you from Radio Essex. Simon and Ed. Okay, so back to your corners and then over to Essex. But cracking stuff, and thank you for talking.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It has been a pleasure, it really has. It's interesting, though, isn't it, in this business of alternative therapy, that we get, one is, the science is here. These guys have done their research. Can I pull you in here? You've done your research, they've done their research, you've done your research. There's no way you guys are going to agree, was there? There's no way.
I think that, yes, I think there are areas that we could have done agree
but generally you won't.
But the thing is that these people are standing up and saying, I'm a scientist, therefore I've done this research, I'm God Almighty, and it's all quite true. I'm saying, I'm very sorry, but I dispute that.
What I'm going to do with you is, one, say thank you for coming in. Al Cooke, magnotherapist. We'll keep all your details here and everything like that. Thank you for the catalogue you brought me this morning, by the way. I'm fascinated with all that stuff. And Angus Ewing, hypnotherapist from Worthing. What I'm going to do with you, Angus, is we've got the book somewhere, okay? Because we only had a chance to actually send you cuttings and the press release. So I want you to have a look through it and then come back to me, will you?
Yes, please do.
Fantastic, all right. Anything you'd like to say in conclusion, though, because nobody ever leaves my studio going, I wasn't allowed to say that.
Yes, I think at the very beginning they talked about 50% of the public going to, I prefer to call it complementary rather than alternative therapies. Now, that 50% of that public is not pig ignorant.
Well, hang on a minute. Those two guys call the whole of the Chinese nation stupid.
I know. This is what I find absolutely incredible.
I don't think they're going to pull back on that one. And Alan Cooke.
Yeah, I mean, I've got people who say, that they don't really mind how it works, but as long as it works. And I think that's something you touched on earlier, Gordon, that, it's something that if it works for you, how it works, they're not really bothered,
Well, there's two sayings, aren't there? Different strokes for different folks, and whatever gets you through the night.
Couldn't agree more.
Great to talk to you. Al Cooke from Horsham, magnotherapist. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Gordon.
And Angus Ewing, hypnotherapist from Worthing. Thank you so very much. Good stuff, guys.
There's a real buzz in the Southern Counties. Our new weekly newsletter updates you on everything and anything people are talking about in our area. From how to deal with dodgy service providers